This is Dr. Parker. I'm here to talk about the Nun's Priest tale in the Canterbury Tales. And this is the Nun's Priest, of course, is the priest who is, or one of the priests, depending on how you count, who is with the prioress. And it's the story of Chanticleer the rooster and Reynard the fox and Pertolote the hen. Um, First, I want to talk about the Nun's Priest. We don't really know much about him. In the general prologue, if you remember, it describes the prioress in great detail. And then it says, and with her was a nun and prestes tre. And we talked about the fact that's kind of a crux. It might be priest is three. In other words, the one priest makes the third member of their party. Or it may be that they're three priests and prestes tre. And we don't really know, but we know this is the one or one of the nun's priests. The only indication we get about him in any kind of way doesn't even come it's not in the general prologue nor in the prologue to his tale, but in the epilogue to his tale. And the host describes him as very strong and handsome and talks about the fact if he weren't a priest, he would have lots and lots of women. He's so good looking and so strong. There's been some suggestion made that he has come along on the trip as kind of a bodyguard for these two religious women, the prioress and the nun, and that's certainly possible. The only other woman on the trip is the wife of Bath, and she might not be someone who's afraid of ill-intended people on the road, but the concept, I mean, it's not an unrealistic concept that he's there for protection, but I don't think there's any evidence one way or the other. But that's pretty much all that we have about him. We have to sort of glean what we can about his personality from the tale that he tells. The tale is very much in the tradition of the beast fable, and this form goes back, of course, to Aesop back in the 500 BC era and earlier than that. It enters in the beast fable itself enters into the Middle Ages, probably in the 1000s or 1100s, through French, the Roman de Renard, the Reynard the fox stories, the clever fox, and the fox in the story is a version of Reynard the fox. There's kind of a species of that. It doesn't really come into English until a little bit later, but what we do see in English of beasts in the medieval literature. In Old English, there was something called the Physiologus, which was a book about animals, and it talked about the Christian symbolic value of each animal. This going back to this theory of Isidore of Seville, that everything in nature was a message for us, that God wrote two books. He wrote the Bible and he wrote the Book of the World, and each one can be read and interpreted. So Physiologus gave symbolic meanings to each animal, and we have that in Old English. And then in Middle English, moving closer into Chaucer's time, we have the bestiary, and there were several bestiaries, and they functioned more or less the same as the Physiologus. There were books of animals, and they talked about what their virtues were, and some of their strange habits, and what their value in the Christian world was, or what their symbolic meaning might be in the Christian world. But Chaucer's really going from the French kind of Reynard type stories. And so we get this great story, and there's several things going on that I want to talk about in the story. One is that this is a mock epic. And what I mean by that is that the story is told in epic proportions. That when Pertolote is described, it talks about the azure color of her throat and her ruby red eyes, and described in the way that a classical princess might be described. When Chanticleer begins to sing, it's described as this sort of godlike event, and everything is very high, and classical authorities are cited, Cicero and people like that. But at the same time, this is really just a story of some chickens. And so the mock epic, and you see that in, for instance, Alexander Pope's Rape of the Lock, which is also a mock epic. When you take a really, really low subject matter and then you juxtapose it with a high style, you get this great sort of comic effect, this great sort of clash of material and stylistics. So watch for that when you read it. It's really funny. There's also, getting back to what we talked about a lot of in the beginning of the semester, there's a fair amount of dream theory going on. That there are basically two schools of thought. One which comes from Pertolote, Chanticleer's girlfriend slash wife, which is that dreams have various meanings, but they're mostly meaningless. They have to do with your humors, and they have to do with what you ate the night before. If you had a bunch of pizza at midnight, you're likely to have bad dreams. And that she tries to give him emetics and laxatives. In other words, she both wants him to throw up and to move his bowels to get rid of whatever evil food he has eaten that's causing him this. But anyway, her theory of dreams is that essentially they're meaningless and they just have to do with some sort of medical digestive inconvenience. The other theory, of course, which is the one that Chanticleer seems to subscribe to, is that dreams do have meanings and that they do give prophecies. And he talks about Macrobius, he talks about Cicero, he talks about all these ancient authorities that say when you have a prophetic dream, you should heed it, especially if it's warning you of some kind of danger. So we have this sort of exercise in competing dream theories, I guess, competing for each other with each other. But of course, the main point of it is that despite the fact that Chanticleer has a very clear argument for his case, and Pertolote does too, Chanticleer still sides with his wife and decides that he's going to prove that he's brave. So, we'll talk about this in a minute. But there's a message of uxoriousness, which means sort of listening to your wife too much. One of the big debates in here, which also streams from the dream theory, is that of free will. That so let's say Chanticleer does have a dream that's prophetic. Does that mean that there's nothing he can do to change it? In which case that means there's free will, but then the value of prophecies is questioned. Or does it mean that no matter what he does, he can't avoid it? And Chaucer's very interested in this when he makes a translation of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. A great deal of that's about free will, and in some of the dream vision poems, we talked about the ideas he has about free will versus predetermination. So anyway, Chanticleer definitely tries to test the bounds of free will by defying his prophecy. And then finally, this is another one of the tales that deals in the marriage debate. What is the how do you best conduct a marriage? How do you approach a marriage? And what I was talking about a couple of bullet points up, this idea that Chanticleer and his wife disagree about what dreams mean, but she says to him, "Well, I guess you're a coward." She says, "I can't be with any man who's a coward." So, against his own better judgment and against his own argument about the importance of prophetic dreams, he follows her advice. And then, of course, that's when he's seized by the fox. So, yeah, this idea of uxoriousness, uxor, UXOR, just means wife, is Latin. So, uxoriousness is the fault of listening too much to your wife, or being ruled by her because you're so in awe of her. It's sort of the fault of letting her be the one to wear the pants in the family, because you lust for her so much. And of course, that seems like a ridiculous concept now, but that was something that was operating in Chaucer's day. And so if there's a message about marriage to be taken from this, and remember, this is coming from a celibate priest who's telling this story, it's something to do with the idea that husbands don't listen to your wives against your own better judgment, just because you want to impress her and show her you're not a coward, and maybe fall into her good graces. Don't go against what your considerably superior male intellect, they would assume, tells you to do. And if you do, then more be the shame to you. So anyway, that's a really really brief overview of this. There's a lot going on in this story, and I want you to pay attention and be sure and read the notes, the footnotes to this one, because as I say, there's an awful lot going on, more so than is immediately apparent. And I'll set you some questions for this and get those out in the next day or so. And I hope you enjoy it. It's one of the good ones. I think you'll like it.